Hello and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin, and today we're going to be talking about the state of the market from the conveyancing point of view to start with. And joining me to talk about this is Chris Barry, Business Development Director of Thomas Legal. Welcome to you.
Thank you for having me.
Good, nice to see you again. Chris, we've got a government that's promised 1.5 million new homes. And on our series of programmes, I've talked to financiers to see if they think that the finance will be available to developers to build all this product, whether mortgages will be available for those that want to buy. And I think that's the critical point, is that if we are to build 1.5 million homes, if indeed it's practical, somebody's got to buy them. And to buy them, they need the money. And they need conveyancing to go through relatively speedily if this cycle is to be hit. Now, from a conveyancing point of view, what do you see as the current state of the market? Are we starting to see, shall we say, green shoots in terms of the number of houses and properties being built, or is it fairly flat still?
It's been a really interesting year so far, hasn't it? I think 2025 will be the most pivotal in a generation for all of the things that's happening at the moment around residential property in the UK. So we started the year with the first changes to the Leasehold Reform Act in the abolishment of the 2-year ownership rule. So there were lots of properties prior to that time that were being bought on the basis that they had to negotiate a lease extension and had to do that with the seller kicking off the process and the buyer taking it over, which was very complex and very lengthy. That 2-year rule has now gone, so a buyer can put an offer in on a property and secure that, safe in the knowledge that just after completion they can go in to extend their lease.
They have the entitlement.
Yeah. Exactly right, yeah. Exactly right. We then had the stamp duty, dare I call it a cliff edge, where people were racing to get completion nice and quickly to save what was most commonly £2,500. And that provided a big wave of activity throughout a period of the year that's typically quite quiet, sort of Christmas and New Year.
Yeah.
As soon as that wave of new work started to die down, interest rates started to reduce, and that sparked a load more demand to the market. And then, of course, from here on out, we have more leasehold reforms planned. We have renters' reform bill coming into fruition. And we have Donald Trump's tariffs, who are seemingly trying to make central banks inject capital into countries and markets, which may cause inflation. And if that inflates the pound, it would make asset prices go up. So I think that's quite appealing to people as well in terms of sparking demand. But does that help your first-time buyer potentially buying a new build every day in the retail market? Maybe, maybe not. I don't think all of those factors come into play. What really comes into play, as you quite rightly say, is can they borrow the money and can they afford the repayments? Now, the outlook on interest rates is something around 3.5% by the end of the year. That's a lot more attractive compared to where we are right now. Inflation on wages has been going up significantly over the last 2 years. So wage growth has been outpacing property growth, which should, in theory, make properties a little bit more expensive. That said, new builds, as we know, are sold at a premium, and these developers need to make a profit. And I don't see materials and labour costs coming down anytime soon.
Well, I think my view on that is that material costs are only likely to go upward. We've got so much disruption through wars around the world. Yeah. So many countries are going to have to enter into huge schedules of rebuilding and reinstatement that it's going to, I mean, I'm sure all our big contractors will be racing abroad to get these big contracts and taking the materials with them. So I can see that causing a shortage. And if you talk to some of the procurement people, they're saying, well, you know, it could leave us in a mess trying to hit this 1.5 million target just in terms of shortage of materials and indeed labour. Yeah. You know, since the sort of Brexit change, a lot of the Eastern European construction workers have gone home to their own countries where the economies are the same, if not better than ours now.
Yes.
So it's a difficult thing to judge, and I'm concerned that the government, whilst the we're seeing in the press at the moment that there seems to be disagreement at the top of the Labour Party as to whether they should be quoting this figure of 1.5 million homes, because it possibly is totally unrealistic. Whether in fact, forget whether it's overambitious or not, but whether we literally just have the facilities to be able to provide. And I don't know that we have. But one of the reasons that you're here today is because my next fear is that if we do build these 1.5 million, can we sell them? Can you put them into the conveyancing process and get them completed within a reasonable amount of time? And that, I think, on current performance levels is questionable, is it not?
Right, we've released some stats over the last few months to say that the average time between having a sale agreed and exchange of contracts is 145 days. I mean, that's an extortionate amount of time, and nearly all of that is down to the conveyancing process. If you look back 20 years, the process was probably half that time, I would say. So I guess the question is, why is it taking so long, and how do we get to a point where we can make that process shorter to deal with this supposed increase in demand? And it really comes down to the fact that somebody at some point in time has been sued for something, and an extra bit of legislation comes in making the process longer. And that is built up over a significant period of time.
But Chris, you know, we meet a lot of people in the studio here in the property market, and what I'm going to just throw at you is this: that if you ask why is conveyancing taking so long, the solicitors will say, well, it's because the lenders are asking so many questions these days, because they're a lot more searching in the information that they want to have, both from developers and from private individuals on a sort of single mortgage basis. But of course, the lenders will say, no, it's the solicitors. They take ages to get the searches. Some local authority searches are taking 3 or 4 months. And, you know, when you go to the Environment Agency, that takes even longer. And then, of course, you've got the criticism of Land Registry, who are perhaps in some cases taking up to 2 years to register the title of a property. Well, that's not conducive to quick conveyancing, is it? None of it.
No, absolutely. There are a couple of other points as well that I think are really important. So there are lots of conveyancers in the industry that take on too much work. The issue there is that actually they take longer to respond. So you could raise some inquiries, and if that solicitor takes 2 or 3 weeks to come back to you with the responses that you need, that is time lost. As you quite rightly point to, with searches, the most prevalent one there is the local authority search, and that is very much dependent on where you are in the country. The average right now, I think, is about 2 to 3 weeks, but some can be as long as 12 to 14, depending on the delays. Some have had significant cyber attacks, and they've been years for results, and luckily we've been able to indemnify against a lot of that. So we have those issues as pinch points. The other big one, of course, is that England and Wales are the only countries in the world to have a leasehold tenure. And it's the leasehold properties that are causing the longest delays through the amount of third parties involved in the process that a lawyer would need to get information from, management companies, freeholders, etc. But also with regards to all of the information that needs to be gathered over a period of time. So I don't really think that we're going to have a situation where that gets resolved anytime soon, with all the information around building safety that needs to be considered right now.
Do you think we ought to go back to having the sellers packs?
Sellers packs were really beneficial, I found. The more information that a lawyer can be presented with up front will only help the situation. Of course, there are lots of other things that need to be achieved throughout the process, but having information up front is the key to making this process quicker.
But it also rules out the vendor that sort of pops his, because it's usually free to get listed with an agent. It stops him sort of putting it on the market, just see what the score is. I'm not really going to sell, but let's see what offers we get. It stops all that sort of nonsense, doesn't it?
Because estate agents don't really want that either.
No.
They want serious clients who really want to move quite quickly. So I think what we don't do in this country is we don't charge sellers up front, but they do in most other countries around the world.
Yeah, sure.
And if we did that, it would certainly separate those from who are serious to those who are perhaps testing the water.
Yes. I mean, having been in agency years ago, I mean, it's talk about highs and lows. I mean, you're either rushed off your feet, and in that case, you're just an order taker.
Yes.
Or you spend all day long telling people why you haven't sold their property. So it's either one or the other. But I think, again, those sellers pact helped to even that out a little bit, because people had got investment in the sale. And I think that's quite important.
Agreed.
Now, you briefly touched on it, that there was an expected rush for the sort of April stamp duty deadline. Did it materialise? Was there a rush? Was it significant?
We've had national data out this morning that tells us that completions in March were 104% up on March last year.
Wow.
So significantly greater when you adjust for seasonality. And what I was most impressed with, actually, is not only were completions higher, because that was kind of expected, although it was far busier than I thought, given the fact that the saving was a lot lower this time than the last stamp duty holiday.
Wasn't spectacular this time, was it?
The most common saving was £2,500 or just over on average. Last time, it could be up to £15,000. So significant when you're talking in property terms. But new inquiries in March was also quite high. So I think what the saving did is just highlight to people that actually moving is on the cards. Maybe perhaps somebody who wasn't thinking of selling thought, well, let's put the property on the market now. We might make the deadline. Doesn't matter if we don't. And that in turn prompted more buyers. But as I said earlier, interest rates did come down around that time as well. And I think that perhaps sparked potential buyers to look to move more quickly than they would have.
I think you said earlier that you thought perhaps interest rates would probably be at 3.5 by the end.
Yeah.
Is that your feeling?
It is. It really is. The 100-year average is 3.5%. We clearly had a decade or so of ultra low interest rates that we will probably never see again. My concern is that if the country doesn't see growth as it's perhaps projected, then the government's going to have to do something, and I think the Bank of England will support.
Yes, it's interesting. You say that people in the country won't see growth. I wonder for the average house buyer, probably at the lower end of the market or the first time market, I wonder how they view growth. I mean, for many years, tens of years, a lot of us have relied on property inflation to give us a profit, and it's the one tax-free way that the average working man can make money. But I think those days are over. It's been a matter of amazement to me that the government hasn't put the stop on tax-free earnings on capital gain on your house. I mean, there's lots of people who've made, especially in London, maybe £500,000 or £1 million tax-free, moved up the market, down the market, without any tax liability whatsoever. And I think that's pretty unsustainable. And if those gains have now effectively gone anyway from the market, I don't see why the government don't step in there. It might be quite a lucrative form of taxation for them. Yeah,
I suppose the idea generally is that people gain in equity and then use that to upsize throughout their life, and then when it's passed down to younger generations in the family, it's
they got hit with
IHT. Yeah. So inflation's a really interesting point. So property values ever so roughly are the equivalent to where they were in 2004 if you adjust for inflation. So although the property is seemingly going up in value, it's only going up in value because we are comparing it to the pound, yes. And the pound over time has been dramatically devalued. And for practical purposes, it's only relative to what you're going to buy next, isn't it? Of course it is. Yeah, absolutely. And in reality, if you are going to upsize, it costs an awful lot of money. So your equity is normally used for a deposit, stamp duty, legal fees, surveys and everything else, and selling agents' fees. So people can't normally afford to upsize significantly. What they tend to have to do then is increase their mortgage as well. Yes. I mean, just coming back to that taxation on a sale, I've thought for many years it would be better for the seller to pay stamp duty. I really do. One, because then if it's included in the price of what you're buying, you can finance it, yeah, which will take some of the strain off the young people having to find the bigger, ever increasing deposits, plus the additions, as you say, solicitors' fees, stamp duty, that sort of thing. I think that would be helpful.
you usually get the cry that, oh, well, I've paid stamp duty once, that would be unfair. Well, that's all right. You can just credit what's been paid against what you've got to pay next time.
I think it's a really good point, and I sort of use this analogy all the time, that actually there's some parts in the country post-COVID that's seen a 30% boom in their house price. Well, ultimately, it's sort of free money, right? So when they're using that money to pay an estate agent to sell their property, it's not really crystallized until they actually sell and do something with it. So it's sort of free. And yeah, the stamp duty could be absorbed there, and maybe a different percentage.
I mean, the key is, and one of the mistakes that I think all governments have made over a period of time, they seem to attack one sector of the market at a time, and it doesn't work like that. Every sector has got to have movement and churn to make the property market, whatever that is, work. It's all got to work. It's no good saying, right, well, we're going to penalise the top end, or we're going to penalise buy to let, or this. It's all got to work. It's all got to flow. It's got to have that churn to make it practical for everybody. Otherwise, you just hit a barrier, don't you?
You do. And stamp duty is a great example. That was brought in as a tax for wealthy properties, where everybody pays stamp duty now. I mean, there are a few properties in the UK that you can buy below £125,000, but, not many. So most people are actually paying stamp. And this most recent stamp duty holiday, which sparked evidently a huge increase in activity, which benefited VAT receipts and everything else, shows that actually, when you do incentivize people, it will help the economy. And I just wonder why that hasn't been looked at as a way to sort of boost general taxation.
Quite interesting. When the government come up with these policies, I'm always intrigued to know where they take their advice from. Do you know?
I don't. They put together committees, but I'm certainly not on one of them.
No. I mean, there are one or two institutions that they probably go to because they're royal institutions and considered probably to be reliable. I'm not always sure that they're the best judge of what's happening on the ground floor in the marketplace. You need to go to your big agents, don't you? The ones that have got the high street offices. They can tell you what's happening at market level. Going to solicitors who are actually doing the conveyancing. But again, just briefly going back to the time of conveyancing, I was talking to a solicitor some time ago who said there'd been some stats out from it's not the Law Society anymore, is it? What's it called?
Law Society, yeah.
Is it Law Society? Saying that actually so many firms now don't have a dedicated conveyancer. It's left to the partner who perhaps will pick up a conveyance through being the family solicitor over a number of years and that sort of thing. And because of that, and the complexities, especially in London, of some of the leasehold issues, that in itself is a slowing factor. Would you go with that?
Yeah, there are circa 4,500 conveyancers in the UK. The vast majority of them are smaller firms, one-man bands, and the issue there is they haven't got the support structure if they're off or sick or whatever, and can't or don't have the money to invest in technology. So these are the setups where you typically have one lawyer, one assistant, dictation, posting things rather than email. It's quite historic, and I think one of the reasons why they can't retire, even though they probably might want to, is that they've got to carry on paying insurance for 6 years afterwards just to cover any future potential claims. So it costs a lot of money to retire in this industry.
Oh, that's very, very, very interesting. I suppose one of the other questions is that you have estate agents who've historically been teased and chastised for charging huge fees. The classic thing that you'll hear somebody say about an agent: good heavens, you all you've done is walk around the property with one client and you've earned yourself 20, 30, 40,000 pounds in fees, especially on, again, some of the London properties. But of course, people don't take into account the amount of data that you've got to have to attract that client in the first place, that buyer in the first place. And it's quite expensive to put a property on the market. You've got photography, videos today, subscriptions to various portals. It's all quite expensive. But that in turn begs the question, should estate agents get more involved in conveyancing? Should they perhaps over a certain size have to have an in-house conveyancer, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's kind of similar to an American model. The brokers and the agents get a lot more involved. I mean, the big difference, of course, is to be a solicitor in the conveyancing world, you're coming out of university with £60,000 worth of debt potentially, and
Wow.
you've got to be very experienced in what you do to give proper advice, because you're protecting the client both now when they buy the property, but in the future when they come to sell it again. And there's something that's come out now called material information, which basically means that the estate agent needs to help the client complete a lot more in-depth information about the property, some of which I think strays into legal, which is a dangerous game. It needs to be dealt with the conveyancer, with the solicitor, in my opinion. So I think, yes, there definitely needs to be a more joined up approach between estate agency and the legal side. But the experts in those fields need to be doing the work.
Yes, okay. That's quite an interesting point you make about retiring, having to continue insurance for that number of years. And I mean, I know sort of PI insurance is very expensive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot of money. I think the two biggest costs in conveyancing right now is insurance. And the reason that's so high is because there are a lot of conveyancers not doing it properly. People are getting sued as a result. Insurers are dropping out of the market. So there are only very few insurers that are insuring conveyancing right now, and therefore the premiums are a lot higher. So they're going up year on year, especially, or even if you haven't had a claim, and especially around building safety. So those firms taking the risk on conveyancing with building safety issues are doing so at a huge premium. The other cost, of course, is a people cost. So it's still a very labour intensive process, and people are expensive and becoming more expensive.
Well, as you say, if they're coming out of university with a sort of £60,000 debt around their neck, of course they're going to be expensive. Yeah. They have to recoup that one way or another, even if it's over a number of years, don't they? And
we quite often charge the lowest fee as well in the process. If you think about what the estate agent receives, what the mortgage broker might receive, the conveyancing fee is quite often the lowest.
What's quite interesting is some of the inconsequential things that happen that do actually have a serious consequence on the industry. For example, if we're right, we were discussing about a lot of firms don't have a specific conveyancer. Where does he get his experience? Who pays for nurturing that experience onward? That's quite a difficult subject in itself, because he might not have the volume of business to conduct to actually gain that experience. And at the end of the day, we're dealing with people's probably largest purchase in their lifetime. So it's quite a responsibility. And as you sort of quite rightly pointed out, some of that these days is because of building safety issues. Now, I hadn't quite realised till you mentioned it then. You've got a freeholder who's got a responsibility to make sure that the building is safe, and we've seen quite a number of quite responsible developers put things right that should have never been wrong in the first place, and they've been issued their EW1 certificate, and that's fine. Are you saying that part of that responsibility transfers to the conveyancing solicitor too, to make
an enormous amount of responsibility? So the mortgage lender, if you are acting for a purchaser, the mortgage lender is pretty much saying, you are acting for us as well. You take the risk as the lawyer, and we are happy if you're happy.
You've got sort of double jeopardy, really, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've got the purchaser and the lender.
And very rarely would a conveyancer visit a property, and if they did, they wouldn't necessarily know what they're looking for. The survey report also has probably some small print to say, check with your lawyer. So, the lawyer takes pretty much all of the risk in that process.
Okay. Let's just finish off on that subject of time for conveyancing. Are there any things that you'd like to sort of put into the arena that would speed up conveyancing significantly?
I think in the short term, the obvious answer for me is that the sellers need to be creating more upfront information more quickly. The longer term outlook, I would love to see something along the lines of a property passport. So we then move into something like the auction process works quite well. All the information is there up front. It exchanges quite quickly, or exchanges immediately and completes quite quickly. Same with the process in France or America. So I think the more information that can be gathered up front will only benefit the buyer's lawyer and everybody else in the process.
I suppose the one subtle difference is that on the continent, so well, certainly in Europe anyway, all that information that's provided for the sale goes before a notary, doesn't it?
Yes.
And that notary is a government official, therefore above the commerciality of the sale or purchase.
Yes.
Okay. I wonder if we could trust that to individual conveyancing firms or estate agents or anybody else in this country. Could it be that independent?
Probably not. I mean, the process could remain broadly the same. I think we just need to front load it. That would stop the issue of half the delays that go on during the process. I'm also a huge fan of blockchain technology and the transparency of it. I think that actually, if we could get to a place, and I am talking maybe a decade down the line, where there is a creation of an NFT or similar for each property that could be traded, that would be transformational. But that is more likely to happen in another country before it happens here in the UK.
I think you're probably right. Chris, it's been very interesting to hear all your various views on the conveyancing and the practicalities of the property market. I'd like to just finish the programme really with trying to get your views, persuade you to get your crystal ball out and tell me where you think the business for the UK is coming from in terms of the property market. Now, London in particular has relied for many years on purchases from the Asia Pacific area in particular, Hong Kong, Singapore, KL, and in latter years, China. Are we still seeing the volume of business coming from those areas, or has it moved?
We're seeing less money coming in from China. I think over the last 8 years, there's been a change in the government rules to limit the amount of money they can take out of the country to invest in overseas real estate unless they waive their rights to residency. So that is sort of getting smaller as a market. The markets that are growing, Russia, obviously people trying to move out of Russia, and London still seems quite a popular place. The US as well, we're seeing lots of US clients coming across. More recently, probably because of their views on Trump and where the country's going. So there is still a lot of either direct foreign investment, and this is through people moving to the UK. Might not be in the data so much because they might be renting here already for a number of years before they decide to buy. Makes sense. Sure. The big one, I think, in terms of money coming out of the country was probably Brexit and employers choosing to base themselves in other countries. So people were coming here for work, and perhaps that's happening less so at the moment.
Okay. And they're selling up the properties, I suppose, that they did have here.
Yeah, we're seeing lots and lots of sales for international buyers of people moving away from London. But in equal terms, we're seeing lots of gifted deposits coming in because people are sending their children here for education. And they're buying flats at good values.
Yes. Well, look, Chris Barry, Business Development Director of Thomas Legal, thank you so much for coming on. Really been interesting having your views. I thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Matters.